All right, I should be live, and this is going to be a fun one because I'm going to have to multitask a little bit. Um, we are streaming from the road, so I am a little bit behind schedule, um, and having to kind of let people know I'm still doing this. Probably just going to do a short 30-minute one, but um, live now. But for those of you who are new to what we do here, we do a live stream every Sunday, pretty much. Try to make it every Sunday at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, where we talk about mental health stuff. So I focus on the chats. So if anybody has a question in the chats, I will set that as a higher priority than anything else. But otherwise, if there's not any chat conversation, I just talk about mental health related stuff. No matter what, hopefully it'll be helpful for people to be able to uh, listen to me, who is a clinical mental health counselor, talk about various mental health things, if that's all makes sense. So, obviously, this is a live stream, and we are posting this on the internet, and people tend to watch. I mean, not a lot of people yet, but there are people that watch these videos. So nothing I say here can be used against me in a court of law. No, I'm just kidding. Is confidential necessarily. So if you ask questions, but I won't try to like point out obviously who the person is that's saying different things in the different questions that might come up. I will just kind of like mention um, the briefest of their names, if that at all. So in terms of the questions, and you can always do the whole trick that nobody sees through of like, this is asking for a friend, you know, what do you do? Thank you for whoever liked that. What do you do when somebody has, depression, asking for a friend, right? Whatever it is. Feel free to post like that, and we won't go into obvious questions. Maybe I'll say context would be great for certain questions, but if you can't give context for confidentiality's sake, no worries. All right. So, what are we going to talk about today when it comes to mental health stuff? Hey, everyone. Oh, glad you made it. So, till I get the questions, I think what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of internal family systems therapy stuff. Now, when I first heard about internal family systems therapy, I thought it had to do with family dynamics and understanding that. And that's like, the theories on middle child versus eldest and the babies, or like just the different system dynamics of different roles we take on, which that part does apply a little bit to internal family systems therapy. So, like, in a given role of a family unit, there might be a black sheep, there might be well, that's usually the problem child, a peacemaker. Hello, thanks for joining the chat. There might be somebody who is the nurturer. I think it's interesting that I see a lot of women typically that are mothers um, falling into one of two roles, either the caring nurturer or the mama bear. This is a more like protective energy, but a little more fierce. Nobody messes with my kid kind of thing. But like those are two different roles for family dynamics. Internal systems family therapy, internal family system therapy, is more about the internal mechanisms in our own mind, because for some of us more complicated and more cast of characters, you'll see someone post a reel about the 7 different personalities they have. That's actually far more common and normal than you think. So each of us have different roles that we have in our mind. There's a couple that are universal in my experience, but there's usually far more of those. Okay, so what am I talking about? You might have the self-critic. That's the one that's most common, right? There's a voice in your head that is constantly evaluating how you're doing, telling you what you should be doing, It's the inner dictator, right? Now, the inner dictator is motivated towards growth, but has a tendency towards negativity. So has a tendency to be overly harsh, but is trying to move you to the place that what, that's all you can do. Come on, you can do better than that. Those kind of things. Hopefully we won't have internet problems again today. We had that last week. Anyway, then there are people that are the internal child, which is probably the converse of that. In the internal child, there is like this innocence and sweetness, naivety, great ability to connect, but often the inner child is neglected. In this family systems therapy, is not seen as important. We have a tendency to often have people think that they're the inner child version of them doesn't really have usefulness anymore. And that's really sad, because that inner child not only is where our biggest source of joy and connection typically are. The inner child is also going to act out if it's neglected. So for anyone that has ever had a baby crying, there are times, of course, that you are going to just not respond to the baby that's crying. You have the baby monitor, you see the baby's okay, and you're just like, okay, I just have to let it cry and let it go through this thing. But there's also the baby crying because they are in danger. And I'm sure parents get better and better at figuring out when the baby is crying to know how much do I need to rush in and help this baby, and how much let the baby sit. But at if there's a real problem and your baby is really crying because of the real problem, and you are not going in there, you're not being a great parent, and it's just going to get louder and louder, and you're going to be more and more divided with your baby. Okay, so internal family systems is not about child rearing. It's about listening to the inner child in you and knowing when, just like you would with a kid, hopefully, if you're a good parent, knowing when the inner child needs to just process its emotion. It's going to cry and, just feel and be miserable. And that's funny. Somebody said, I think I have an inner child who is the dictator. Gosh, it's an interesting, I wonder how you say that, because are you saying that because your inner child is very demanding and goes all over the place, and you see that as the one that's the dictator? Because usually the dictator and the inner child are pretty different. The dictator is the one who insults. The inner child doesn't tell you that. It's going to be more the softness of your heart is that inner child role. So like the part of you that just wants to be heard, just wants to be seen, just wants to be loved, that's the inner child. It can turn into feeling like the dictator is taking over because we're neglecting the child. I mean, the inner child will throw temper tantrums, right? If it's not getting the attention that it needs. If you repress stuff, it'll come out in various ways, right? But the whole idea, obviously, it's one person, like it's just you. And this dynamic, this framework of looking at therapy is helpful for some and not for others. So internal family systems therapy, some people find it confusing. Some people find it really hard to identify different roles of the different parts of themselves. I talked about a couple universal parts so far, but there are very individual parts as well, right? So like you might have a tendency, well, here's one that I've seen a couple times, where somebody has got a fear of rejection, and the way they cope to that can be very different. One can be purposely being annoying. So there are people that I've seen who will lean into this kind of annoying personality because they know they're going to be mocked, or at least they feel that way. So they're going to mock first. They're going to tease first, and they're going to, not in a way of bullying, but in a way of like having themselves be self-deprecating humor kind of thing, right? Because it's like, if I'm going to be mocked and I'm going to be hated, I'm at least going to control it. So I'll just lean into that character. So that would be like kind of like clown, right? Right? The playing the fool, the village idiot. Honestly, I don't know if I should say this or not, but I think he's not super self-conscious. My brother Robert will often lean into the role of the. This is a little different than what I just described, but he leans a little bit into the role of the village idiot, where he pretends like he doesn't understand things that are going on, and he will say, "No, I genuinely don't understand what's going on." And don't get me wrong, like he's not necessarily the most socially gifted person on the planet. Neither am I. I'm not, insulting him here. I think he gets a lot more than he lets on. He is a genius. Like he's a very intelligent man. He understands very complicated thing. He finds the role one for humor's sake, but also I think he just finds that the socially easiest role to fit into is I'll be the weirdo, right? So that is a character in, if you will, internal family system therapy. That is a role that he can fall into. Is that who he is? No. You could say it's a part, right? But think of it not as a piece when we say a part, but a cast, like a part, like a role, right? So if you're all of a sudden in a play, right, you have different roles that you take, and you might have a play that you have multiple different roles in that play, and you put on different outfits in that play, and you have different personas, maybe different ways of talking in that play. Now, usually people, how this shows up, they won't necessarily have like different accents, but they can have different body postures. And so like, again, you might go, I don't really relate to this, I don't really understand it. Yeah, you probably do if you think about it. Like for instance, if all of a sudden somebody gets you angry and you feel like it's time to fight, and all of a sudden you get like, like you're sticking your chest out, and all of a sudden you get this attitude and you're talking a little tougher. And it's like, I grew up in the Detroit area. So like the gangster was like that was the tough guys, like the thugs, And so I might have the tendency to fall into that kind of way of framing things and voice and tone when I'm in that trying to be tough perspective. I don't know. I haven't had this happen in a while. But my point is that your body posture even changes. Your personality actually changes in that moment. So the goal of internal family systems therapy is not only to know yourself well, but it's to try to take those different parts of you, those different roles that you can play and fall into, and understand them better. Because when you do, like in general in life, whether it's applied to you or under, the more you get connected with it. Naturally, right? As I get to understand my cat Ripley and we do different things like different tricks, we develop a language where we can look at each other and we can understand each other more and more, and then we feel more connected. The same thing is true with you. You can connect more with you, or you can disconnect more with you. Okay, someone said, I see that, but I also see that Robert is so smart, and the village idiot thing. There's obviously a delay here, and know exactly what's going on around him. Yeah, so Robert is my brother. That was one of my examples of leaning into the village idiot at times. Very smart, and actually knows what's going on a lot around him, but he just finds that role an easy one to fall into. Now, he'll go in and out of that role depending on the context. And it's not, so this is what people I think don't understand too. It's not like a persona for most people that they intentionally decide to fit into. It's more like certain context draws out different aspects of their personality, and then that role takes over. And it's like, oh, I'm walking into this role. And labeling it with internal family systems therapy helps you understand these different aspects, so it gets them to connect with the different parts of your personality and gets you more towards this thing called integration. And integrating your personality is one of the healthiest things that you can do. Do you think certain sports are better or worse for development of life skill type stuff? Oh, absolutely. I have a very love hate thing with sports. I there's a lot. I like physical activity. I think movement is great. I love doing things with people. I think that is great. I love the determination of self growth. I think the competitiveness of sports is definitely something that has pros and cons with it. And the cons sometimes to me outweigh the pros if you get in competitive cultures. So if they focus way too much on winning versus losing. With that said, obviously there are individual sports and team sports. Now, wrestling is what I did most in my childhood, and it is an individual sport, which means on individual responsibility, courage, resilience, those things are all going to be more, they're going to happen more than a team sports. With team, you got cooperation, communication that are going to increase a lot better. And you also have like the social pressure of that. So knowing how to operate in a social unit when stress is applied will happen far more in a team sport than an individual sport. How big and or varied do you need your social support network to be successful? Um, More than one person that you're sleeping with, to be totally blunt about things. So I think that that's one of the biggest mistakes people make when they are someone who has trust issues. They try to build trust with just one person, and it's typically the person that they're having sexual relationships with, whether they're married or not. Like that, I'm not, trying to speak on issues about that. I'm just saying, I don't care if you're married, if you have only one person as your community and it is the person that you're romantically tied with, that is a recipe for disaster. That is a recipe for collapse. So what you want is definitely something that is more balanced than that. I would say this is from biblical philosophy, I would say, more than biblical theology, but it bears a lot of weight in uh, evidence-based practices, which is the 3, 12, and then 150. Actually, 3, 12, and 150. So the science-based numbers that I would say is 3, 12, and 150. Okay, so 3 intimate friends that you are very close to, all right, very connected with. These are the people that have true accountability. And what true accountability means is if something went wrong, they would know without you telling them. So in other words, your lives are enough connected that they would sense something is off about you before you have to tell them. So that's the 3. The 12 are people that you could call if a moment you were struggling, and they won't be wondering why you're calling. They won't be like whether they can answer the call at any moment. There's 12 people that you would feel comfortable calling, and they would feel comfortable being there for you if you had a need that arose. Okay. And then the 150 is the maximum list of people that you can actually affiliate with and feel connected to. That's the tribe side. So 150, you don't need 150 friends. Okay. You only really need 12 close friends. But in terms of a community of 150 is about the peak. You can be fine at 100, right? Of people that you are somehow connected with, even if it's indirectly. So if your 12 friends have 12 friends, right, and it's not too much overlap, you'll be about at that number. Um, Dunham's number is the 150, by the way, and you can see this. Like any group that gets above 150 in any organization will turn into little micro groups, and they lose sense of their whole as a community. So they studied tribes of Native Americans in different places throughout the world, and they found that tribes ended up stopped growing at about 150 because that's about all you can contain. right? So 150, and then the 12. I can talk more about the evidence for the 12 and why that's a big thing. Is that's the same group number for evidence base that in small groups is about all you can get to, still have intimate conversations. So you can have a group meeting of 30 people, but people are not going to share as intimately or feel as connected as a 12 group meeting. Now, of course, none of these are hard, fast numbers, but if you have 3 to 5 close friends, um, 10 to 14 somewhat close friends, like decently connected with people, and then a community that they're more broadly connected with, that's probably the healthiest dynamic. And that's pretty universal when you look at communities throughout like the globe. Like people in Africa work the same, people in China on these 3 numbers. How much do you think diet affects mental health? I think way more than people think it does. So I think that when it comes to what we're consuming with our eyes, our ears, and our mouth, it's all going to affect us. But if you think about it, like the eyes and the ears stick with us only through our mind. But the things we put in our mouth stick with us for a much longer period of time because they're actually part of our body. The system is complicated. Like there's no way around it. Okay. There are people that study their whole life on just nutrition and its effects on the body and the mind alone. There are people that study medicine and know so much about the physical body, but almost nothing about nutrition and almost nothing about mental health. To actually have a sense of all of it is a very rare thing, even when it comes to just understanding yourself and the way you work. So what I encourage people to do in this is to be a mad scientist. A mad scientist, yeah, once on the lips, forever on the hips. Yeah, it's a funny little line. Sometimes that's, can it affect not just physical but emotional. So like, I think sugar addiction is one of the worst addictions that people have because you can't abstain for food forever, and it's a very strong, readily available way of managing emotions. And so if you're somebody who has a real hard time being alone, without your emotions going all over, then you're gonna, yeah, I mean, you could, in America, very likely will go to sugar and food, because that's a very powerful, readily available one. It made me think. I'm kind of half distracted because it reminded me of these quotes that I just actually looked up. One of them was, all of humanity, this is Blaise Pascal, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly alone in a room. So I thought that was an interesting perspective. I don't know if I agree with it 100%, but I think there's some wisdom there. Of all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. So this is where I go with the diet affects mental health. It's almost like I'm saying, yes, diet does affect mental health, but also we try to affect our mental health with diet, right? So the way you eat will affect the way that you feel, but trying to manage the way you feel by the way you eat is a huge mistake. If you can just allow yourself to process those emotions without going to food, and that would be a big step. Like, even if you go, okay, I'm going to spend 5 minutes feeling whatever emotions that I'm feeling, allow myself to feel it, whether it's hangry, right, or sad. I'm going to feel it for 5 minutes before I get to food. You've already taken a huge step towards mental health, a huge step to personal growth. This goes for any coping strategy, is if we can find 5 minutes that we're going to be willing to feel and go through that. Here's another line that I thought was related to what I just said. This is Simone Weil. I might be pronouncing the last name wrong. We have to try to cure our faults by attention and not by will. I thought that was really powerful. We have to try to cure our thoughts or cure our faults by attention and not by will. To me, attention is when we're trying to drive it, we're trying to white knuckle it, we're trying to push change to happen. And attention is when we just stretch towards it, we just bring it into our awareness, and we allow that to be enough, right? For a stage of your self growth, if you decided to focus on being aware and accepting of your shortcomings, quote unquote, right? Or tall fallings, even worse. That's an inside joke for some of you know it. But anyway, if you were just aware of your potential flaws and accepted them for a season before you tried to change them, you'd probably find change comes far easier. Going all the way back to internal family systems therapy, this is listening to the inner child before you try to comfort him or her, letting them just kind of feel and process and trusting that there's something good that's going to come from that. What are the best therapies to address PTSD? So it depends on the type of PTSD, I would say. EMDR can be helpful with people that have very traumatic incidences that need to be reprocessed. Post-traumatic growth does a great job of reframing what I would say are more traumatic stories than traumatic experiences, right? So it's not focused on the event and trying to reprocess the event, but more creating a positive story that you can move forward in. So that's post-traumatic growth therapy. ACT is a value-based thing that can really help you move forward from PTSD and works really well with somebody who has a moral injury, which is when you break your values and there's a huge consequence to it, which is a huge part of PTSD. But ACT is very similar to cognitive behavioral therapy, but also has mindfulness training with it, which is why I think it does better with PTSD. Because PTSD, a mindful and purposeful approach is usually going to be most effective. Can you talk some about CPR principles and or responses? Because I feel like you could go on tangents on that, and it's really helpful for relationships. You know, the core of what we teach with our CPR training, which is our Christian therapy training more than cardiopulmonary resuscitation, which it is when it comes to the medical resetting of the heart, is that if you feel like you are having somebody who is stuck, right, who is looking emotionally dead, restarting them into life, a huge part of that is by reminding them who they are at their best. So too often, this goes back to even, I could circle this back to when you're struggling with change, you really want to change, and instead of trying to jump to change, you spend a season of acceptance, allowing yourself to embrace as you are and then try to change. It's a similar kind of energy of, with CPR, you're trying to remind people instead of what's wrong with them, which is what we jump to. Why do you do this stupid thing that you do, right? Doesn't usually produce positive changes. Just a little therapist technique there. Don't do that. Instead, what's more helpful is reminding the person who they are at their best and then asking them if they think that they're the healthiest version of themselves and what would that look like. And then you're starting to empower them to find their solutions rather than looking to you to tell them how to fix them, even if they're not, right? Because that's what we do. Like, even when somebody's just struggling and like, hey, can I share some with you? I've really been struggling lately. We're all of a sudden like, fix, which unfortunately can make people feel like they shouldn't share, especially the second time. So here's the thing. People usually take a lot longer to change. Oh, I can tell you this, because maybe this is a tangent. I don't know. But one of the things that I get a little sick of hearing, and I don't always know the best way to respond when somebody is telling me this, because I know they're coming from a place of hurt, is when they've created a limiting belief that they think is wisdom, that if somebody keeps doing the same thing over and over again, they're not really apologizing and they don't really care about you. Okay. And I've heard this a bunch of times. It's not a genuine apology if the person keeps doing it. Right. Okay. This is not true. And if you take that attitude towards yourself, you're going to have a very toxic relationship with yourself. A lot of changes take a lot of time. The average person in quitting smoking, as an example, is 8 times. It's a pretty famous statistic. And whether it's literally true of everyone or not, there is something to that. For many, many changes, it takes many, many tries before people are generally successful. So it's not that they don't will enough. Again, we have to try to cure our faults by attention, not by will. They are just struggling to be better, right? They're just doing the best they can with what they got, and that takes time. Why is it so hard to come home after a trip or vacation? I mean, it depends on where your home is. It depends on what state it is. That would be a great opportunity to journal and process and really think through of like, what am I valuing most in my life? What am I valuing in vacation? It might not be that your life needs to change that much. It might be that your mindset needs to change a lot. So there was this little Japanese woman who got very famous for the tidying minimalist movement for a while. She was a organizer of stuff. So she would go through and she would like help people declutter. And her big thing was like, does it spark joy? And it was a little like hippie Buddhist kind of thing. Like she talked about these socks and whether they spark joy, and if they were bound together, then they probably were too bound in life. And so they needed to be put in a way, folded in a way that was neat and pretty and not bounding them. And I don't think socks really have emotions, but I love what she said about when someone says, well, then I should throw out all my work clothes because my work clothes don't spark joy. And she said, if the thing that provides for your lifestyle does not spark joy, then you might need a mindset shift. You might need to look at your job with different eyes and focus on what it provides you. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't sometimes switch their job because they hate it. If you hate your job, you might need to look for a new one. But you could also just switch your mindset when it comes to the job and find that is enough. You need to adventure harder on vacation. Come back ready for normalcy because you hiked so hard while you were away, which I think is respond to the trip. Yeah, and that could be part of it too. It's like if you vacation to an extent that you eventually go, I need something normal, you know. Everyone has different rhythm and different needs that works for them. That's the mad scientist experiment. Like a scientist, you experiment, note, journal, process, like figure stuff out, right? But a mad scientist, you're experimenting on you, right? So you're trying different things for you. This is true for diet, by the way. So I think one of the reasons why we'll never come up with a universal ideal diet for everyone is that I think people have adapted based on their ethnicity and anthropology for different diet needs. I think this is backed by science, with even like people of African descent are highly lactose intolerant, much higher percentage than people who are European, who have been drinking cow's milk for many, many years. So they tend to do better with it. So all that to say, different people have different diets that work. Different people have different vacation rhythms that work. My brain is frequently, especially at night, coming up with awful things that could happen to my loved ones. Would you suggest how I can tell my brain thanks but no thanks? Then that's exactly right. Thanks but no thanks, right? So the first thing to say is, why is my brain coming up with awful things that could happen to my loved ones? Because I deeply care about my loved ones. What an awesome thing to have that connection. What a great gift to have people that you care about. This is the positive reframe that you start to do it. So you say, thank you, brain, for acknowledging the deep care that I have for all of these individuals and bringing them to mind. I take that as a wonderful opportunity to pray for them, to give them positive thoughts. But at the same time, I am being diligent to do the things that I need to do to be a responsible mom, sister, friend, grandmother, whatever role you have in their lives, right? I'm doing that because that part of your brain is designed to be scanning for neglect, right? It's like, oh, was there a medical procedure that we shouldn't have encouraged them to do? Or, is there some need that's not being met, and say, wait a second. No, they're okay. I'm okay. I'm being diligent. Let me think about what's a positive thing to focus on right now. Now, I think it's usually we get the most impact on that change if the way we are thinking is in line with the subject. But I think that can be more challenging for some. So if you can use your imagination towards even a trivial, objective, completely different subject that's unrelated, but it captivates you, that's still a positive step in the right direction, right? So in other words, thank you, brain, for reminding me of all these people that I get to care about. I am being diligent, so I don't need right now you to tell me of all the things that could go wrong, because I know that I'm being responsible, accepting the things I cannot change, the courage things that change things that can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Therefore, I would love to imagine something different. And I'm going to imagine right now a beautiful meadow with flowers and jumping through that meadow, right? That would be the random subject, right? And your imagination cannot think about two things at once. It has to take a focus and choose it. So anxiety and depression both come from your imagination. And if your imagination is focused in another direction, it will at least temporarily help you with those symptoms. Okay. So then you might go, okay, that worked, but I can do better, right? You could think of that positive. You could do this prayerfully. You could do that positive, loving thoughts towards those individual, imagining them well, healthy, and vibrant. And that might help in that. My brain does that too. Is that normal? So I don't call out who's who, although some people's got names that are pretty obvious who they are. There's not a hard to guess common thread here for why those two individuals both have very similar mental habits into when it comes to anxiety, because they're both people that are deeply caring, both people that are caretakers. And one of the things that I've said to a client before is that if you are caretaking enough, you've got to eventually be carefree, because you can't just take something over and over and not have it build up to the point of you feeling overwhelmed. So caretakers, listen up. You got to have some regular aspect of your life that helps you to start being carefreeing. And you can intentionally think about all the care that you've taken throughout the week and then release it in a way that's carefreeing. But yes, both of those individuals, they both happen to be women. They both happen to be mothers. They both happen to be very loving, passionate people that I don't want to say could on their air fall into codependency, but are far more likely to be neglectful of themselves as they look to help other people. So it's not surprising at all that their anxieties are about the ones they love who are struggling. It's a great trait from a great person to have. Hello, a good answer. Yeah, thanks. Do you think it's possibly to remain healthy in all circumstances? How different does that expectation look? Stranded on an island, fallout shelter, crazy stuff, Okay, I'm trying to understand what you're asking about of all the things I just said, because there's a lag and sometimes the things that I say and when I get the questions. So it's hard to know when you say, do you think it's possible to remain healthy in all? Okay, maybe I read it wrong. I need to learn how to read. Do you think it's possible to remain healthy in all circumstances? Now I understand the question. Okay. Yes, I do. If by healthy you mean mentally and emotionally. And what does that actually mean? So, how do you articulate what is mentally and emotionally healthy? I can tell you, and it might not be what you first think of, and this is a huge reframe. This might be the like one of the biggest aha moments for some people in this entire hour. Have I hyped it up enough? Okay, here it is. If you are accurately responding to the situations that you are in, you are emotionally and mentally healthy. The closer you are grounded to the present and reality, the better. So, when you're starting to break from reality, even if that means that you are happier in the moment, you might be emotionally less healthy. So there are people that are very unhealthy emotionally that are happy all the time. And it's really hard to get them to see how they are not very emotionally healthy people. Because instead of actually dealing with the topic that could cause them emotional stress or sadness, they just choose to, fall into toxic positivity and put a smiling face on these terrible experiences, which disconnects them with the reality of their circumstances and individuals around them, disconnects them even with themselves. So they become deeply fractured people that are divided from themselves and others. So, how different does that expectation look? If you're stranded on an island, what should you feel? Well, you should probably feel some anxiety unless you've got a lot of supplies, but you should probably feel anxious about your supplies so that you watch over them more carefully. You probably should feel lonely, and you should expect to feel lonely. And if you're on a stranded island on your own and you're feeling lonely, you're emotionally healthy in that moment. If you are crying, you are emotionally healthy in that moment. If you are feeling numb, you are not emotionally healthy. And look, that's not saying that it's bad and danger, Will Robinson, if you're feeling numb in an island. Underneath it all is a cope, and that cope is not sustainable long term. Your brain is shutting off different parts of your emotions to try to respond to the trauma that it's sensing, and that costs you RAM, that costs you energy. You're going to be struggling, right? Fallout shelter, right? Similar, right? That prison, right? You're probably feeling of injustice. That should be good. That's a good sign that your mind is working, right? Wilson, yeah, with the Castaway. Um, Wilson, the volleyball that Tom Hanks end up developing. I don't remember the character's name, but the Tom Hanks end up developing a strong connection with. Um, was a cope, and it was a pretty severe cope. Got another like you, thumbs up, thank you for whoever did that. But anyway, it was probably a pretty severe cope. Was it mentally healthy? No, no. Was it a smart strategy given the circumstances? Maybe. So obviously, in a ideal circumstances, this is where it's like, when it comes to therapy, why it's sometimes really hard to give universal answers. And that's why individual therapy is very helpful, because like it kind of depends. There are times when the best thing you can do is have a relationship with a stupid volleyball, because you don't have humans available. You're going emotionally crazy, and it helps your imagination to have a relationship with something, even though it's an animal object, right? Because it's like at least something that you can connect with. Don't like I obviously, I'm not saying anyone's doing this with Tom Hanks or whatever. It's a movie, but I'm saying don't like poo poo on strategies because they're weird, right? um, if where you're at to connect with your inner child, I mean, this is a famous, maybe one of the most evidence based exercises that we do in mental health called the empty chair technique. We do it with people that have passed away. We do it with people that we can't talk to because they're just, you know, there's too much conflict there or emotions. And we can do this with them ourselves. So people can actually take the different parts of themselves and picture them in an empty chair. And the more you can imagine it and actually talk to that person in the chair that isn't really there, the better. The more that the person talks back to you, the better, right? And you could say that sounds crazy. That sounds insane. Well, for one, it's not, because you're aware that you're doing it. So it's a product of your imagination, not a delusion that you get lost in. And for two, that in that thing that you're doing, you're getting more in touch with yourself, and it's a way to process your thoughts and feelings. So some people, Wilson, dinner is ready. Okay. Some people, it's like they're what am I trying? I'm getting sorry, got distracted there. But Wilson, the volleyball. Some people, having that place to put that imagination is necessary. Some people it's not, right? So some people can immediately tell you how they're feeling. You ask them, "What are you feeling?" They've got a great word to describe it. Some people, they don't have words to describe how they're feeling. They've got like colors or senses or, like different things that they're like, I'm feeling warm, and, this warmth in my inner chest, and, it's painful and stuff like that. And they're not talking about physical, they're talking about emotional, right? Same thing with what's going on internally. Some people are like, yeah, right now I'm struggling with my ego because I'm having insecurities because of this that happened, and these feelings. Other people have no clue. They're like, I don't know, I'm just angry. I don't know why I'm angry. I'm angry, right? So the internal family systems therapy, or even creating a friendship with their, volleyball, right, might be a very helpful exercise for them, because we remember better when we are actively engaged in something physically and verbally, right? So if we're trying to get in touch with our thoughts and our feelings without externalizing them in some way, it's going to be very difficult. This is also why art therapy works, and it works sometimes for people that literally can't speak, right? They can just paint, and they paint their feelings, and eventually it starts making sense to the people that are caring for them, and it starts making sense to them. Oh, your dreams work the same way, right? The more you start to write down your dreams and then interpret them, even if your interpretation at first is really off from what your subconscious is trying to tell you, it eventually hears your conscious interpreting things a certain way, and then it goes, I get now dreams that will help them interpret what I'm trying to say. Your mind is trying to get in touch with you. That's why the self-critic is loud. That's why the inner child is so loud. It's all trying to get in touch with you. So is the empty chair method called the Clint Eastwood method? I don't get that joke. I'm thinking it's either Dirty Harry, or like that the good, bad, and the ugly kind of thing with a standoff, kind of, where you're not trying to shoot the person in the empty chair. So I don't know if it's the same as Clint Eastwood and that, but you'd have to specify exactly what you mean. But the whole idea is to start to engage in a conversation to help create a framework that gets you aligned and understanding of what's going on internally when you're struggling, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm articulating it well today. Different subject. What do you think of the benefits of grounding, walking barefoot, hugging trees, etc.? I love being barefoot on the ground. Me too. I think it's very helpful and healthy. I think we'd all be healthier individuals if we spent more time connecting with nature. And I think anytime you can connect with nature is good. In therapy, grounding doesn't necessarily mean literal grounding. Usually it means just being more present in the moment. And we do these different exercises that draw in different senses, specifically the ones that we don't focus on as much, so that we can start to understand how much we can create a certain, and this goes back to the healthy and different circumstances, how much we can change how we feel about a circumstance based on playing with our experiences. For instance, right now, if I asked everyone who's listening to start thinking about what their feet are feeling, and just put it on the ground wherever they are and think about how it feels, maybe through a sock, maybe they're barefoot, right? But just think about that. All of a sudden, your sensations are experiencing something. They were already experiencing it before, but now you're more heightenedly aware of it. So that grounds you in the moment in that sensation, right? I think that when you can do that in nature, there's even more power to it when you do it on something that is alive and moving. I mean, it's like there's no way around it, man. The hippies were right about a lot of stuff, right? Being in nature affects our physical body. Being in community. I was talking about art and expressing yourself with art therapy. The next thing I was going to say was dance therapy. Obviously, I'm a little biased towards, because I grew up in a dancing family, but like, man, there's a reason why tribes have gathered round with simple rhythms, do 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 do. Oh, what does that sound like? The heart, right? And so they set this rhythm and they play it on a drum, right? Different kinds of drums in different cultures, right? And then they do a dance. And the dance is something that everyone can do. Now, some people will dance better and some people will dance worse. But it doesn't matter, because the basics is going to be built on this. And then what you do is when you have this whole tribe dance together, right? Doing right? They start actually having their hearts in rhythm, and they're all on the same wavelength. And they'll actually start to have this universal experience where they all of a sudden feel in sync, and they can be grounded not just with nature, but with each other. It's a beautiful experience. Maybe if I remember, wait, you know what? What a great idea I just had of doing an interview with him for an episode, maybe if I could even do it. But I was going to just share about my Uncle Henry, who is a dance professor, and some of the things that I learned about dance and the history of dance, as it revolves around our connection with God and other things, because it's a pretty deep conversation. He has a lot of wisdom about stuff that I didn't know anything about. And it's always fun when somebody knows a lot about something you don't know a lot about, that is fascinating and interesting to you. But anyway, it would be fun to do an interview. I wonder if I could with him over Zoom or something. He's a little bit of an older fellow, not the youngest guy in the world. So I don't know how much he does the technology thing, but it would be fun to do a thing with him. And maybe if not, on an unscripted conversation, one of you could ask me about dance and tribal dance and how it connects and the history of that thing, because I remember a lot of what he shared with me years ago now. But anyway, he talked to the empty chair during the Oscars. Oh, Clint Eastwood talked to the empty chairs during Oscars. It was supposed to be funny. That makes sense. All right, cool. All right, well, that's about our I gotta look up that Clint Eastwood empty chair thing now for the Oscars. But that settles our unscripted mental health conversation. So I hope it was helpful for all of you, and I hope you guys got a lot out of it. Please tune in next week, 7 o'clock Eastern time on Sunday, and tell your friends, invite them to the chat, invite them with their questions. If you can't afford therapy, you can at least come here, and we can talk about mental health as we get healthier and healthier together. All right. Have a great day. I love you all.